So we are blessed that this year, August 6th, falls on a Sunday. It means that we get to interrupt our kind of jaunt through ordinary time to celebrate this wonderful moment, mystery, in the life of Jesus that I want to propose to you was altogether unique. In fact, for centuries, believers have found in what happened on that mountain this clarity to every aspect of their faith. Like it harmonizes how God acted with the people in the Old Testament and the New. It answers all their questions. There's like a clarity from what happened on Mount Tabor. My favorite is if you ever get to Rome, certainly you'll go into the Vatican Museum, and the work of art that had the most impact on my heart was large. It must be 30 or 40 feet tall. A painting of this scene by the great Raphael. And it's long, and the top, it's divided into two. And it shows the mystery of the Transfiguration. You could look it up online, but it's not going to have the same effect. But it's still worth doing. At the very center, elevated off the ground, is Jesus. And somehow, Raphael, in his expertise and his giftedness, imagines to just capture the shining countenance of Jesus. Of course, there's beams of light going forth from him. And to his left, down a little bit, also off the ground, and to his right is Moses and Elijah conversing with him. And then at his feet, those three apostles that he invited up there, kind of overwhelmed, kind of shielding themselves from the light. When you look at that, you're just so drawn into it. You see order, harmony, and clarity. It's beautiful. Now, the second half of the painting is what comes right after this gospel scene. After all, they have to go down the mountain. And we're told there's a boy there who has an unclean spirit. In particular, it's a destructive spirit. It throws him into fire and water. And his parents, as you can imagine, good parents, just like so helpless. They don't know what to do. And so while they were up on the mountain, they brought this boy to the other 9 apostles. They said, "You've got to do something." And they tried, but they weren't successful. So when they come down from the mountain, that's what Jesus is walking into. There's tension, there's unbelief, there's the presence of evil. And Raphael captures that with just so much like hands pointing in different ways. It's dark, there's no shape. And he shows you this contrast between what happened on Mount Tabor and then this pilgrimage that we're all in, walking. Light, harmony, order, everything makes sense. You're drawn to it. And then just kind of chaotic mess. Now, I think we can empathize with Peter, right? When he was on Mount Tabor, what did he want to do? He wanted to buy real estate. He's like, "Jesus, let's just set up camp here. Like somehow let's just live here." Of course, it's not what happened. But I want you to just stay with Peter, James, and John for a bit, humanly speaking. Remember, they've been with him about 3 years. This is a man who has captured their hearts. There's something exceptional about him. And yet he eats, and he's hungry again, and he sleeps, and he gets tired. He shares in their humanity to the full. So when they finally see the divinity just like in the light, they must have been like two sentiments. This is my interpretation. They must have been like, "That was cool." Like, that was amazing. And we got to be there. Those other 9 chumps, they're just going to have to hear it from us. Like divinity, just shining out, His glory. But I wonder, as if as the days went along, there wasn't something else in their heart. We knew that's who He was, but we couldn't even begin to imagine. But if that's who He is, then how come He doesn't just do that all the time? After all, as we've been journeying with him for 3 years, there is increased hostility to him. The people are unbelieving and they're posturing to put him to death. Like, if that's the power in him, like, I've often told you on Easter Sunday morning, like, if I was Jesus, you know what I would have done when I rose from the dead? I would have gone and knocked on Pontius Pilate's door and said, what do you think of this? But it's actually not how God acts. And this is stunning to us. So I want to just real briefly reflect on, what then does this tell us about who God is, about Jesus? I think 3 things. First, God does not want to overwhelm us. I think many of us can read through the scriptures and see what happened in Genesis at the beginning. Do you remember? God creates them. He gives them everything, puts them in a garden that they didn't do anything to earn, and then they rebel, and one sin leads to another. And that's how we got Noah's flood, right? God just said, let's just start over, you know? I think you and I can resonate with that. Like, why doesn't he just be God? And just cast out the wicked? Just put dysfunction in order. Well, you know, if he does, then what does it mean for us? What does it mean for us? Sometimes, like, it's so humbling when I realize how patient God is with me. When I think of the rebellion of my sin, sometimes I'm just still stuck, you know? And I think I should be done. It should be over. Like, game over, like in one of those, like, you know, video games, it's over. But it's not how he is. He doesn't overwhelm us. The humility of God, though he is in the form of God, they glimpsed it. He is God, one with the Father. And yet he emptied himself. He took the form of a slave. He died a criminal's death. The humility of God that doesn't want to overwhelm you, always giving us an opportunity. Secondly, I think what it tells us about God, this moment of Mount Tabor, is that God always gives us what we need to keep walking and journeying with him in the truth. Do you know when this mystery encounter occurred in Jesus' life? Probably a few weeks before Calvary. A few weeks before Calvary. They're almost to Jerusalem. And he's been preparing their hearts like, it's going to be bad. Like, I'm going to die a violent death. And so the fathers of the church, Augustine and Ambrose, they said, how sweet is Jesus to give them this taste of honey in glory, to carry them through the awful darkness that would have been. And that's who God is. I was walking with someone recently, they lost their wife. It's painful after 3 decades together. Just the humanity of the grief, the goodness of his grief to pour forth. And I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I can see so clearly that God is present, and he's sustaining him, and he's giving this man what he needs to get up every day and to take the next step of faith. And God does that for you and I. He does. I know, if you're like me, I can get caught staring at the darkness. I can just look at dysfunction, evil in the world. I can stare at it. And then God just says, hey, how about this? How about look here? Isn't that beautiful when Peter's writing, maybe like years later, his epistle, our second reading? He says, you would do well in wherever you are in life, whatever hardship, whatever burden, whatever suffering, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus. Like a lamp shining in a dark place. Just look for him. Look for signs of his presence. He sustains us. And then thirdly, what does it say about God? That he doesn't wield his power like I might if I were him. God is love. And I know we've heard that, but I want to propose to you, until we encounter the Lord ever more deeply and authentically, we really don't even know what love is. Like, he's love. That's his essence. It's his being. And the way he loves gives us a taste of like, oh, that's why I was created. That's what I'm meant for. I was just with a family, a couple last night. They just finished an 8-day silent retreat. Can you imagine? And what was flowing from their hearts was so beautiful. I can hear confessions for hours because there's a grace to be in the mercy of Jesus. But sin is very boring. It's very boring. You can only sin in so many ways. But what this couple experienced of God's majesty and His personal love, like it was listening to a beautiful song that I've never heard. I could have stayed there for hours. It's fascinating. You know, when I lead silent retreats, I get one coming up. You can pray next weekend. The missionary will be here. I'm taking Father Sam with me. There'll be over 40 women from this parish, 3 days of silence. And you know what I notice on these retreats? Some of them might be here, so I'm giving it away. I get funnier as the retreat goes along. It's actually not true. I think I'm consistently funny. But any stories or little lightness or jokes I tell at the beginning, just not landing. You can feel just like the stress of life on their faces. Do you know what happens after about 24 or 36 hours? I give my conference in the chapel, and I see countenances transformed by joy, by the peace of the Lord, by His presence. Like it said, light shone from the face of Jesus. That happens in us when we draw close to Him. His love is better than life. And then when I tell stories, miraculously they all laugh. And I think, maybe I should have been a comedian. That's not true. Final thing I want to say about this. We got a baptism too. I'm going to finish here. Okay. What did this event mean for Peter, James, and John? Well, Peter denied Him. It didn't mean that he was going to live perfectly ever after. But you can imagine in the despair of having failed his friend, he remembered this moment. St. James, he was the very first apostle to be martyred. You can be sure he trusted in the glory and power of God to sustain him. And how about John? You know, when he writes his gospel, his is so different than the other three. When he talks about the passion, yep, it's true. It was violent. It was a criminal's death. It was bloody. It's sobering. But you know what John says? He says it was Jesus' amazing glory that shone forth. Why does he say that? Because he's like, no, I was on the mountain with Him. You don't get it. This was God. Nobody did that to Him unless He allowed it. Nobody took His life unless He laid it down freely. And that's glory. That is true love and loving. So today we extol the Lord that He's so kind, courteous. He doesn't want to overwhelm any of us. He wants to call us from our sin. You can be sure He's gently persistent. He's going to keep knocking on our hearts, but He's not going to overwhelm us. He's going to give us what we need, no matter what comes in life. And He wants to know everyone in this church. I'm talking to you. He wants you to taste His love, because that love revises everything. It's a love that is better than life.